Hello YouTube, hello viewers, and welcome back to yet another episode of creating a social network API using Laravel. We're actually getting quite far with this now. So we've managed in our last video, I think we made the images relatable. So when we pulled the user, for example, we're getting the file paths of those images, which is pretty cool. What we're going to look at today is the friendship system. A lot of you have been asking, how do we set this up? Well, it's really simple. I mean, we're kind of covering the same type of logic over and over again in each one of these videos. But I'm going to show you some cool things that we can do with Laravel in case you missed it when we did the status update one. So we're going to kind of follow the same principle. In this episode, it might be a little bit longer than normal. That's because we're going through a few different functions, different things that we can do. So bear with it and hopefully you'll learn something new. Okay, so first of all, we need to kind of work out how friendships work. We need to remember that all our users pretty much fall under the same category. So we've got a list of users here, and then basically we're just going to associate one of these IDs to another ID, which, believe it or not, is in the same table. But we need to make it so we can link them together. And we're going to do something very similar to, I think, what we did with the status updates. Actually, I didn't do it with the status updates, I don't think. Nor the user files. So it'll be the first time we're actually going to look at pivot tables in this episode, which is pretty cool. And pivot tables are quite useful when it comes to not making a whole new model, for example. We can just create some logic to assign values and we can retrieve them. But you'll see it in this episode. Okay, cool. So let's get cracking. First things first is we need to make sure that we create ourselves a new table. So I'm just going to go into my Docker container. It's just a little bit more easy for me. Sometimes you guys can do it in your original terminal. I just like doing mine in my Docker container. It's just a little bit more easier for me. And we just need to create a migration script here. Okay. We do not require a model for this because it's going to be a pivot table. And pivot tables don't require us to have a model attached to it. And you'll see why we don't need a model. So we're going to do artisan, make, and then migration, I think it is. And normally I just make model and then create a migration, but hopefully this is correct. And we're going to call this friend user. We'll just call it that, I guess. So friend users. So these are basically just making friends and users to each other. And artisan cannot be opened. Why is this? Artisan, why are you not working? Okay. PHP artisan. Oh, I'm in the wrong thing, that's why. I'm like, why is this not working? I'm in the wrong folder. That's my Laradock folder, which I shouldn't have been in. Okay, so let's do that again. So artisan make migration friend user. And basically this is going to be a table that we're going to hold two user IDs, and it's going to be friends of who's requesting, and you'll kind of see exactly what's going to happen in a second. So if we go into our project, we should now, inside our database folder, migrations, we should have a new migration script. Okay? And we're going to write these from scratch just so you can see what happens, but we have to have a schema, and it's going to be called create. So this is basically saying we're going to make a new table. And that new table, we're going to call friend underscore user. Okay? So we're going to kind of follow the same name that we called here. So friend user will do in this case here. And then it's of function, open close brackets. Actually, I think it already did it for me. So open close brackets. And inside there, we're going to use this thing called blueprint. And it's going to be $table. Again, if you're not too shy to set this up, you can quite easily just copy and paste it. That's also fine. There's no issues with that at all. So that's set up there. And then I think we've got function to there, and then we need to open curlies, and then that's it. Okay, so inside here, we just need to do some of our table logic. So it's the same as what we've been doing all the time on all these. So we're going to have big increments here. Oops, not integer, big increments. And this is going to be of type ID. So this is, actually, we don't really need this, to be honest. We don't need to have this ID here because this is going to be a pivot table. So I apologize. We'll just ignore that one. We don't actually need that. What we do need is reference to our user table. And we have done this before with this logic here. So we're actually going to copy this and we're actually going to copy it twice. Okay, might look a bit strange for now, but you'll see why this is happening. But first, what we're going to call the first column is we're going to call this one friend ID, but we're still going to reference ID on users. Okay, so it's going to be our foreign key here, and then we're going to do the same here on this one. It's going to be user ID, and it's going to then reference our user ID. And then obviously what we can do on here is, we're just missing it, we can say on delete, and then basically on delete we want to use a cascade on delete. I spelled that wrong. Cascade on delete. And we'll do the same with the one below it. Cool. Okay. And then obviously on our down function, we can see on this one it just does a schema drop if exists, and we're going to do exactly the same thing here. So drop if exists, and it's just a friend user. I should have really copied and pasted the first one, but you can't. I just want to show you that you can actually just write them out if you wanted to do that. Again, it's entirely up to you. Cool. So now that's set up. Let's see this working when we hit the migrate. So if we do artisan migrate, this should create our new table. Perfect. We got no errors because we know that the big increments that we have for the tables refer back to our logic here, which is our big integer. So remember that if you're using just normal int or increments, I think it'll just be int that you need to use, not big int. So just keep that in mind if you are using different things. Cool. So how does this actually work? Well, first we need to make sure that we have some type of relationship working here. Okay. And to do this, we need to make sure that we have reference to each one of those inside its model. But if you remember, we've only got one model, and that's the user model. And this is where things become a little bit interesting. So let's actually jump into our user model, and we're going to create something very similar to what we did here. Okay, so we can just actually copy this. Let me just change it, I guess. And we're actually going to call this one friends. Like so, friends. And we're actually going to not use has many. It's going to be belongs to many. Okay, because the friends are going to belong to users. So you've got to think of it that way. And we're going to reference ourselves, which is going to be the user model, right? And we're going to reference, if we press the comma here, you can see once we start typing, it's going to say, well, what table are we going to use? Well, we're going to use the table we just created, which was this friend user table here. Okay, so the friend user table. And then the next thing it asks us for is, what is our foreign pivot key? Well, we know this is the user underscore ID that we want to use as our foreign. And then our related pivot key is going to be the friend ID. Okay, so this is how we reference our friends at the moment when it comes to our user. So if we had to do something like this, so in our to array, so we could have friends, oops, I kept that out of the marker, so friends, and then $this, and the same way we've done the other one, so friends, for example, I spelled that completely wrong, friends, like that. So same way we did images. And if I had to use the user model, like we have done before, so if I hit send, you'll notice that I have no friends here. Okay, so we know that that's working because we're getting a result back, but nothing's really happening with that because this user, whoever he is, so Bob9 or user ID 11, doesn't really have any friends. But if we look at the database and we just do a refresh, you'll notice that we have friend user table that just has two columns, one called friend ID and one called user ID. So how do we make that friend? Well, I mean, it's just like with anything else, we have to make an endpoint that we can point to, right? So let's head into our API.php, and I don't know, let's put it under user, I guess. Okay, and we could just use route, and we're going to use get. I guess we could do that because we're not really posting anything. And what we're going to do is we're just going to post, in this case, an ID, because it's going to be user / that. Or we could say add friend, actually this will make more sense for most people, add friend / ID. Just do capital F there for camel case. And where's it going to go? Well, we can actually go to the user controller, like so, comma, user controller, and we'll just call this add friend, like so. So now we have this endpoint here called add friend, which is perfect because we can just, on here, we can just duplicate this, I guess. Change this to add friend, like so. And obviously it's not app user me, it's app user, add friend, and we're using this new pass ID like we did on these. Okay, so user, add friend, /, and then this is going to be an ID of some sort. Okay, so you'll notice I did this in Postman. It allows me to create some variables in here if I want to. Okay. Obviously, we need to make sure that we have some type of function for this to run into. So we need to make this add friend function inside our user controller. So let's get our user controller open. So user controller. And we're just going to make a new function. Public function add friend. And we're going to be passing in this ID, right? Okay. And we could put a DD here if we want to, and we'll just show you that this ID will be whatever we pass into that URL string. So let's see what happens. So let's hit send, and I get nothing back. Let's put a number in here actually, and there we go. So we get our DD back because it's of reference of a number of some sort. Okay, so we know this route's working, which is perfect. It's hitting add friend. And we're actually going to an ID here. Notice I'm not putting in the URL because I'm setting the variable down here as a path variable. Again, this is quite handy if you guys adding strings into here, and it's quite nice if you want to use it for different things. I could have gone a step more crazy and added, for example, this here into its own variable, and then I don't have to keep writing it over and over again. But in regards to the tutorial, we're not really too bothered about that, I don't think. Okay, so how do we do this? How does this work? Well, it's really, really, really easy. Okay, so to add a friend, the easiest, I'm going to put into notes here so we can have it for reference. And when you look at my my Git repo, you can use each one if you like. So to add a friend, for example, it's dead simple, right? All we're going to have to write is this: our auth, because we know they authenticated. Our auth user, because we know we've got a user attached to that, right? And then we're going to call friends after that, okay? And then we're going to use this Laravel voodoo magic again called attach, okay? And this is the cool thing about pivot tables, is we can use this thing called attach. There are others which we're going to look at in a minute of how do we remove things and then how do we do other cool things with this pivot table. So here we're saying, okay, we've got auth because we know that we've logged in. The user is what's coming from the auth token that we have. We're using this thing called friends. So if I click into it, you can see that we're referencing friends here. And then we're just going to attach some values into here, and you'll notice it's an array. So we can pass more than one if we wanted to. But in this case, we want to just pass ID, okay? And so this is going to say, okay, I'm going to add this friend ID and I'm going to attach it to this user. But first of all, let's just see if ID friend1 exists because we don't want this to break. So let's just check if user 1 is there. So we do have a user 1. And let's just say, we'll just call this add user equals that. And then I can just do this return response, blah, blah, blah. So we can see if it works. So add user, I will just call this added user, and then we'll just empty array, just so we know that it's working. Okay, so let's hit send on this and let's see what happens. So let's go to Postman, hit send, and we get this success message which says, okay, it's true, and we've not added the user. Okay, cool. So let's have a look what's happening in our database. Let's go to our friend users, and we can see that we now got the friend ID against the user ID. And that's pretty cool because we didn't have to create a new service. We didn't have to create a new repository. We didn't have to make a new contract because the pivot table works as a nice little leeway for us that we can just add numerical values of references. And you can do this quite often with a few different bits and pieces. So let's see what happens if I call the get me now. So hit send, and you'll notice now I have a friend. That friend is called Wayne, and obviously he's got no friends. Okay, and the list can keep going on. And this is happening because I've got the to array here. And remember I said to you, it's not always best practice to put the to array in because every time I'm running through this model, sorry, the user model, it's going to keep adding friends onto the list, and it's going to keep going and keep going and keep going. I'm going to show you a different way how we can get the users friends anyways. Cool. All right, so the next question is, okay, so that's how we add friends. So how do we remove a friend? Okay, so how do we remove a friend? So let's just comment that out for now. And actually, we're just going to take the same code because we can use the same code really. And this one's going to be called remove friends. Okay, again, we're going to do the same thing, auth user. And then obviously we're going to use our friends here. But now we're going to use another bit of Laravel voodoo magic, which is called detach. Okay, and this is going to remove anything I pass in here. Okay, so we could have an endpoint called remove friend if we wanted to, and inside that endpoint we'll use this thing called detach. Okay, and normally you do that between a switch because it's just a toggle, isn't it? So if you think about Facebook or Instagram, you're just hitting that like button, or you're hitting, you know, something, and you're just adding that person as a friend, or, you know, it could be anything that you're doing in regards to that. Don't forget, this is instant friends, by the way. I'm not verifying that I want to be their friend. We could add that in, I guess, if you wanted to. But this is just saying I want to follow you, and kind of like a Twitter idea. So to remove a user, again, as I said, which is auth user, we're using friends. We're going to detach the ID number here. Okay, so let's see what happens if I do this. So that's coming out. So let's just see what happens. Let's go into our postman and hit send. Oops, wrong one. It's going to be add friend. Hit send. And we can see that we get a positive response back. It's the wrong complete message because we're just looking at how pivot tables work here. But if we go back into the database, refresh, you'll notice that it's gone now. And if we go into postman and do the me request, I won't have that friend anymore. That friend has now disappeared. Okay. And then there's one more that's pretty interesting, but we're going to add a few more friends. So let's do this again. So let's go back into postman. And this time I'm going to ignore this ID for now because we pass it in as array, for example, in here if we wanted to. But if I wanted to add more than one friend, I'm just going to uncomment this for an example. And I'm going to add friend 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so these are all people inside our database. If we hit postman, this should add all of them in for us on add friend. Do I not have all those users? See, this is the problem that we're going to have with if we didn't have those users. So we got 1, 3, 5. Okay, this is a bit awkward. Let's just do 20 to 23. Okay, so normally we do the check, but I'm trying to keep the tutorial as short as I can. So let's do 20, 21, 22, 23. They all exist, right? So let's hit send on postman this time. And there we go. So obviously we get a positive result back. We look inside the database at our friend users. We can see that they belong to everybody. We look at me in this instance. We hit send. He's got all his friends there. So you can see they're all attached to that user. If we had to use remove, we'll remove just the one user. However, there is this other thing called sync. Okay, so if we have a look at sync, for example, so again, we're just going to duplicate this code and we're just going to call this one sync friends, like so. And instead of detach, we're going to use this thing called sync. Okay, now there is loads more. You can look at the Laravel documentation, but these are the main ones that I would normally use when I'm coding these types of systems. And basically sync, you'll see what's going to happen. Now remember I had 4 users here, right? And let's say, for example, I now want to sync against the ID number that I pass in, right? Look what's going to happen to the data when we do this. So I'm going to add my friend. You see I get a successful response back. But if I go into my database and refresh, you'll notice it's taken all of my friends away, right? And only allocated me the one on the sync that's come back. Now you could use this for various things. So like mass deletion, for example, or mass accept, and you only have so many people that are selected. You can remove all the ones that aren't relevant to us and we don't really need them, to be honest. Okay. And that's pretty much it, to be honest. I mean, that's how the pivot table would work in regards to adding friends. And you could do it vice versa. You could log in as a different user, add them in, and this would look slightly different. There won't be much change to that. So I hope you enjoyed this session. It might be a bit too much to get into your head, but the only thing you really need to realize is that on your database model here that we create, you only need to make references to the columns and then to the table. Make sure the tables are before you do the pivot table, or you're going to have some issues. And then the only other important piece of the segment is to make sure that this is correct, that you set up the relationship as you should do. So it belongs to many. It belongs to its own class because they're both users. They're no different to anyone else. And you're just referencing a table, a foreign, and a related key. It's been great taking you for this episode, and I hope you liked it. If you did, make sure you hit that like button. If you really, really liked it, make sure that you hit the subscribe button. And if you really, 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 really liked it, make sure that you share this with all your friends. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Goodbye.